Hello, this is Daniel Wilson from the University of California, Berkeley and the Gadgil Lab for Energy and Water Research. Thank you for volunteering to help us develop the SUMsarizer tool, which is a machine learning powered tool to label cook stove SUMS data. I wanted to say thank you to our funding agencies, especially SIGA at UC Berkeley, as well as IPA, Google, and the United States Agency for International Development. I also want to say thank you to my collaborators, Ajay Pilarasetti and Jeremy Coyle, who've been the real coding muscle and brains behind this project. So thanks, guys. What this screencast is going to be about is a tutorial to show you around the SUMsarizer tool and how to label data using it. So using the link provided in the email I sent out, please open the SUMsarizer website, hopefully using Google Chrome. We find Google Chrome works the best. You can log into the SUMsarizer tool using the login name and password that we provided. So I'll go ahead and enter my credentials here. Once you have logged in to the SUMsarizer tool, you'll see two different kinds of studies: My Studies and Studies to Label. A study is a group of SUMS temperature logs. So usually a study would be for a particular project you've performed. So if you've made your own study, that study will be under My Studies. And if somebody else has made a study but shared it with you, it'll be under Studies to Label. So when you log in, you shouldn't have anything under My Studies, but you will have the SUMsarizer training set for volunteers under Studies to Label. Go ahead and click on that SUMsarizer training set. This takes you to the data viewer and navigator. So in the left-hand side, what you'll see is a list of all the comma-separated value files that were uploaded to the SUMsarizer tool. Below that, for each CSV file that's highlighted, is the information that was in the header file for that particular CSV. All of these data were taken with iButtons, so this is the typical header data you would see at the top of an iButton data file. In this top right-hand corner of this top left-hand pane, you'll see this little eyeball. That lets you switch the view mode. So right now we're in the data labeling view mode, but we can switch over to a view mode that lets us overview all the data. So the idea behind the SUMsarizer is that it's very onerous, first of all, to write code to label cook stove data ad hoc. Many NGOs don't have the ability to write their own code, and even if you do have the ability to write your own code, it can be really time-consuming to write special algorithms to label SUMS data. So we wanted to employ a technique using machine learning. So the way this technique works is you upload all of the data to the SUMsarizer tool. Then the SUMsarizer tool will take a subset of that data. In this case, the subset is shown in blue. It takes that subset and has you label the subset. When you label the subset, it trains the algorithm behind the SUMsarizer, and the SUMsarizer can label the rest of the data set. So if you have, say, 1,000 SUMS data files, you might only have to label 1 to 5% of that data by hand, and then the SUMsarizer tool can go through and auto-label the rest of the data for you. And the interesting thing is that you don't need to know any coding to be able to do that. So I'll show you a little bit about how to navigate the data. So once you've selected the CSV file you're interested in, you can zoom out of or into the data by highlighting sections of the data using this gray bar at the bottom of the screen. So here you can see this person. We started taking data for them at the very end of July, and it went through the beginning of September. You can zoom into data by dragging this gray box. You zoom in by shrinking the size of the gray box around the particular part of data you want to look at. You can also pan left and right by using your mouse and clicking and dragging, But an even faster way to get around the data set is to use the keys or the arrow keys on your keyboard. So the up arrow key will zoom in, the down arrow key will zoom out. That's what I'm pushing now. Right pans to the right and left pans to the left. And as you get practice, this is a very quick way to zoom way into the data, pan left and right, and zoom out of the data. I recommend using that to navigate your data. So let's look at some other users here. Let's see Alpha Shear 1 C21. What you can see here, and I'm going to zoom all the way out of this data set. For this data set that also lasted from late July to early September, only this blue section has been chosen by the SUMsarizer for you to label. So we can't actually label any data from this view. This is the data overview view, and we know we're in the data overview view because we have this little tag icon. What you want to do to label the data is actually go into the labeling mode. So you switch the view mode here. Now we're in the labeling mode. So now instead of seeing all the data, we just see the subset of the data that was shown in blue before. The color's been changed back to black. I can zoom all the way out of this data set to get a look at what it is we're going to label. I can switch the view really quick just to show you this little blue section here. Just there is in fact the range of data that we're going to label by hand. So your help in training the SUMsarizer, what we're going to do is collect hand-labeled data from a variety of experts, both to get feedback on how the SUMsarizer tool works, but also to see how different experts label different or the same set of data. So I'm going to show you just how to use the tool, but you don't need to label data in the same manner I am, or using any of the same rules that or techniques that I use. You should label what you believe is cooking based on your experience as an expert. So starting here, looks like there's some breakfast starting at late in the morning. On this particular day, I can click and drag a box around the time that I think is cooking. That highlights these dots in red. Now I can scroll to the right and click and drag another box. I'll keep on going like this, covering the whole data set until I'm finished. So I'm just going to get through this quickly. If you miss a point, like I just did, you can click on it and that will toggle the point from black to red. So just in case it's unclear, red here means that's what I as an expert believe is cooking, and black is not cooking. So I'm going to say this meal lasted this long. This one, I'm going to say the stove cooled down and then it restarted, and I'll call this a new meal here. And I just keep on going through like this, lickety-split, until finally I'm going to skip over these, which you should not, but I'm going to skip over them to accelerate the pace of this training video. I reach the end. If it looks like there's a cookstove event that gets cut off at the end of your time series, please still label it. Same thing applies for the beginning. If there's sort of a part of a cookstove cooking event or part of a cooking event right at the beginning, go ahead and label it. Anything you think is cooking, please label in red. Once you're done with a particular sensor, you can click Done/Next. You'll know that the server has correctly stored your labels because a little green check mark will appear next to the stove. So for this particular person, the subset of data that we're given doesn't actually contain that many cooking events. So I'm going to scroll to the right. Nothing quite happening here. There's an event. I'm going to zoom in on it. Highlight what I think is cooking, click to toggle, and again, label the rest of these cooking events. Who knows what happened here? Maybe they made a little bit of tea right as the stove was cooling down. You can always look at this x-axis here to get an idea, a sense of the amount of time that's passing. Sometimes all this zooming in and out can really distort our perception of time, but just keep in mind this event here starts at about, say 3:50 in the afternoon and ends at about 5:10 or 5:15. I'm actually going to say that's heat from another stove, just in my expert opinion. Maybe that has nothing to do with cooking on this stove. Just to mix it up a little bit here. And we're done. And as we scroll to the right, watch in this top right-hand corner, the option to move to the next CSV file appears as soon as you scroll all the way to the right. So remember I was saying if it looks like a cook stove or a cooking event starts sort of in the middle of the section of time that the SUMsarizer chose to select for you for labeling, that's fine. You can still label it as cooking. Let's say that you just really mess up, your cat walks across your keyboard, or you have a toddler and things are just looking really awful and it's really kind of frustrating to try and deselect the data to get things back the way you wanted it. See here, I'm having some trouble and getting kind of frustrated. You can always click this Clear Labels button, and what that will do is remove all of the labels for that particular CSV file. Your labels for previous CSV files and future CSV files should remain intact. So that Clear Labels button only applies for what you're working on, and that's sort of the nuclear option if you just get really frustrated with the labels. Remember though, sometimes you can be zoomed too far out, and trying to label data like this is a really big mistake. You know, let's say that I'm labeling this event here, and I think I got it really nice. But when I zoom in, you can see I really probably didn't label it correctly. All of this here I'd sort of messed up. So I recommend you zoom in until you can see the individual dots. The dots represent the data points that are collected by the sums, and then they're connected by lines here. So I'll fix that up. Okay. So remember, the principle here is you're only labeling a very small proportion of the full data set. This particular data set we're working off of represents about 4 million data points, and maybe we'll only hand label a very small subset of that, say less than 10% by hand. We can label it using our own expert opinion, or we can label it using gold standard data, say from cooking logs or in-field observation, and then that labeled data trains the algorithm, and the algorithm will auto-label the rest of the data. As a volunteer, what you're doing is help us build the robustness of those algorithms that will auto-label the rest of the data by providing your voluntary labels to this particular fixed data set. When you're all done, you'll know you're done because there'll be a green check mark next to all of the CSV files that you've completed. Once you get down to this very last one, and you scroll to the very right, and you finish labeling, it won't say done.next or done/next in the top right, it'll just say done. And once you have green check marks through the whole thing, you can go ahead and press log out. If you need to take a break, no problem. The green check mark data should be saved for you, so you can always log out halfway through and come back in the future and finish your labeling. Thank you very much for helping us out. We hope that this tool will be a really useful asset for the Cookstove research community. So from all the folks at Berkeley, especially myself, Danny Wilson, as well as my colleagues Ajay Pilarsetti and Jeremy Coyle, thank you for volunteering.